Coming up next, the music industry has never had a shortage of shady handshake deals. What many have learned is to have a lawyer look it over first and always get it in writing. So many musicians were pushed out, have their royalties stolen, have their livelihoods taken away, and screwed over every which way but loose. Today, we have some of the biggest backstabbing stories in rock history, including a co-founder who walked away from his band with a gentleman's agreement intact. He'd written a lot of hits for this band, and his co-singer promised to not play his hit songs in exchange for the band's name. Pretty good deal. But then when ticket sales plummeted, he reneged on the deal, and he toured under the name and played the hits that weren't even his, and he wouldn't even let the fans see a final reunion with this other singer. Then there's a heavy metal guitarist who was fired from the band after his manager caught him listening to Eagles, on their tour bus. It wasn't good for a metal band. Plus the story of a band of gifted songwriters who trusted the wrong guy for sure. Too little too late, they discovered their business manager had stolen all of their money and bankrupted the band, and the damage was enough to end their lives. Victims of the biggest fraud in history. Let's get into it. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember taking pictures with your Kodak camera and then taking it in your film to get it developed, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. I try to explain that to my kids, and they're like, what, you had to get film developed? Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and comment to keep the music alive, keep this channel going. It's time for another edition of our new show, Double Cross, the biggest screw-overs in music history. We're going to get right into it. Coming in at number 5, we're starting out with a little Supertramp drama between Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies, the late Rick Davies. The pinnacle of Supertramp's career came in 1979 with the release of Breakfast in America, a global phenomenon that spawned hits like the logical song, Goodbye Stranger, and Take the Long Way Home. Of course, the album went to number 1 on the Hot 100.
Teach me how to be sensible, logical. Goodbye, stranger, it's been nice. I wish you took care if you're feeling good. Well, take the long way home.
It also has one of the most storied album covers as well. If you hold it up to a mirror, you can see 9/11 right above the two twin towers there, and it looks like the person's inside of a plane heading toward there. It's a very strange thing. A lot of people, there's a story there for sure. I think we've covered it before. Maybe we should get into it at length. Let me know below if you'd like to see it. But really, we're going to focus on this album was huge. It went to number 1 on the top 200, sold over 20 million copies, turned Supertramp from an acclaimed art rock act into one of the biggest pop rock bands on the planet at the moment. However, the success of Breakfast in America also intensified long-standing creative tensions between the bluesier styles of Rick Davies and the pop-oriented Roger Hodgson. So following a major world tour and the release of 1982's famous Last Words, Roger Hodgson officially broke with the group in 1983, bringing a definitive end to Supertramp's classic era. When Roger Hodgson walked away, he made a gentleman's agreement with his co-founder Rick Davies. Davies could keep the Supertramp name to tour, which was huge, but he agreed not to perform any of Hodgson's signature hits. Davies shook on it, but because Hodgson trusted his partner of 14 years, he never put it in writing. Rick Davies, he took sole leadership of Supertramp, releasing 2 studio albums and touring before disbanding the group in '88. However, the post-Hodgson Supertramp officially began playing Roger's hits during the 1988 World Tour. Faced with fan demand and pressure to fill arenas up, Davies began integrating Hodgson's signature tracks into the nightly set list. His ticket sales were not good. The band routinely performed Hodgson's hits like the logical song and Breakfast in America. This decision deeply fractured the relationship between the two co-founders and remained a point of contention for decades.
Teach me how to be sensible, logical. Do we have kippers for breakfast? Mommy dear, mommy dear.
Actually, in 1996, Davies revived the Supertramp moniker without Roger Hodgson, recruiting classic-era members like John Helliwell and Bob Siebenberg, alongside a rotating cast of new musicians. They recorded 2 albums and toured periodically before falling inactive again in 2002. But during that span, they once again played Roger's iconic tracks. Again, they agreed not to, did it anyway.
I said, what would you say? They'll be calling you a radical.
Conversations were held over the years about a Supertramp reunion with Roger intact. One of these took place in 2005, but talks broke down. 4 years later, in 2009, Roger said he believed the Supertramp reunion wasn't going to happen. However, the next year, Supertramp reunited for the band's 40th anniversary, but they did it without Hodgson. And yeah, they were still playing his songs. In June 2010, Roger wrote an open letter to friends and fans thanking them for their support and clearing the air on a few things. Roger explained that his songs, come from a deep and very personal place, and they carry his beliefs in his life's philosophy. He also explained that the other members of Supertramp never held the same spiritual beliefs as him, so he felt like it was in vain for them to be doing his songs. Said Roger, "What I wrote about didn't represent the rest of the band or their beliefs at all. So for Rick to claim credit for songs he didn't write or believe in, that's an integrity issue. It's hard for me to keep thinking of them as Supertramp songs when the band didn't compose them or write the music for them." Which is why the advertising of the Supertramp tour with my voice and my songs, it's been very difficult for me, end of quote. The way Roger saw it, the band was capitalizing on his art to sell tickets, using his songs in the backdrop, his voice. Despite already being in the middle of his own tour, Roger offered to join Rick and Supertramp for a few special reunion shows for the fans. It wasn't something that he really wanted to do per se, but he knew for Supertramp fans it would be a big deal to them. So he extended an olive branch to Rick Davies after all this turmoil. However, Davies' management turned Roger down, and they continued to use his tracks without him. Following this missed opportunity for reconciliation, the relationship between Roger and Rick remained deeply estranged. They never shared a stage ever again. And sadly, up until Rick's death in 2025, the decades-long dispute was never, ever resolved. I can't believe that Rick wouldn't combine with Roger to do a couple of shows for the fans. I mean, what a missed opportunity, especially when he's the one that broke the deal. Just sad. I mean, do it for the fans. All right, for my number 4 pick, I've got The Cure and the friendship between frontman Robert Smith and Lowell Tolhurst. Started out on the very first day of school in 1964. 2 5-year-olds named Robert and Lawrence, a.k.a. Lowell, and they met at the bus stop outside St. Francis Primary School in Crawley, England. They became fast friends from there. As teenagers, a shared obsession with the music deepened their friendship into an unbreakable bond. And for the next 25 years, through every high and every low, Lowell Tolhurst would be Robert Smith's closest companion. The Cure formed in Crawley in '76, cycling through a handful of names: Malice, Easy Cure, the Obelisk. And then they landed on the one that really stuck. Tolhurst was there for all of it, anchoring the band as a steady, reliable drummer through their earliest post-punk years and into the bleak, atmospheric gothic trilogy of albums like 17 Seconds, Faith, and Pornography. Lowell was Smith's sounding board. He was also his co-conspirator and a constant in a lineup that shifted constantly around them. Yeah, he did start out as the drummer. A lot of people don't know that. When the punishing 1982 Pornography tour fractured the band and Robert Smith decided to pivot towards something completely different, something was a lighter, more whimsical synth-pop direction, Tolhurst didn't push back. He had his back. He put down his drumsticks, he picked up a keyboard, and he adapted. The gamble paid off. By the mid-1980s, The Cure had stabilized into a strong core lineup and were releasing some of the most compelling music of their career, including The Head on the Door in 1985 and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me in 1987. Those 2 albums broke them wide open internationally. I mean, tracks like In Between Days, classic, and of course, Just Like Heaven, their first top 40 hit. They pushed them beyond the boundaries of cult favorite status, and Tolhurst was right there alongside Robert Smith for all of it. But behind the scenes, something was really going wrong. Tolhurst's drinking had been escalating for years, and by the late 80s, it had become a serious, debilitating problem. As the band gathered at Hook End Manor in late 1988 to record what would become Disintegration, Tolhurst was barely functional at all. He really couldn't contribute meaningfully to the sessions at all, so the band started unplugging instruments and pulling the mixing sliders to zero. He sat in the room while the record was made around him, effectively invisible. Robert Smith had tried to hold on. For a long time, he shielded his oldest friend, keeping him in the band well past the point where other members had lost their patience. and they absorbed the frustration and the tension rather than force the issue. But what he couldn't protect Tolhurst from was the rest of the band. The atmosphere turned toxic, and eventually Smith's bandmates delivered an ultimatum. Tolhurst goes, or we go. Of course, Smith chose the band, which was a good decision, just before Disintegration was released in 1989, while Tolhurst, the boy from the bus stop, the co-founder, the very one who had given up his instrument without complaint when Smith asked him to, he was abruptly fired. From Tolhurst's perspective, the betrayal cut deep. I mean, the friend he had followed through every reinvention, every crisis, every dark chapter of the band's history had let the others push him out the door. 25 years of brotherhood ended with a coup, and Robert Smith, however reluctantly, he'd signed off on it. But you know, you can kind of understand where Robert Smith's coming from. I mean, I see both sides of it. He was loyal to Robert Smith, but you know, when drinking becomes a problem and he's not able to give creatively, this one is, I don't know, it's a double cross from both sides in some ways. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. All right, coming in at number 3 on our countdown, I've got Weezer and the drama that went down between frontman Rivers Cuomo and bassist Matt Sharp, and this one definitely is a double cross. When Rivers Cuomo and Matt Sharp moved into Los Angeles apartment together in 1992, I mean, it looked like a winning partnership. Cuomo was the introverted, obsessive musical architect. Sharp was charismatic. He was outgoing and the guy handling the networking in the band's early business infrastructure. They balanced each other out perfectly, it seemed, and together they helped build one of the most beloved rock bands of the 90s. Weezer's self-titled debut, better known as the Blue Album, that dropped on May 10th, 1994, one of the best of the 90s, produced by the Cars' Oracle Kasich. It was an immediate sensation, kicking out 3 top 10 alt-rock hits, Undone the Sweater Song, Buddy Holly, and Say It Ain't So, all classics.
You want to destroy my sweater.
Big crunchy guitars, infectious hooks, music videos directed by Spike Jonze, and they all became MTV fixtures. The album went multi-platinum almost overnight. Sharp's driving bass lines and falsetto harmonies were woven into the DNA of that record for sure. His fingerprints all over it. Now jump ahead to the fall of 1995, and Sharp launched a solo project called The Rentals. Do you remember them? They released their debut album Return of the Rentals on Halloween of that year, and the single Friends of P picked up traction on alternative radio and reached number 7 on the US modern rock charts. Matt Sharp, he split his time between The Rentals and working on Weezer's follow-up Pinkerton through 1996. He contributed creatively to both simultaneously, even as the sessions for Pinkerton grew increasingly dark and very difficult. Sharp would later describe those recording sessions was like watching Rivers have a breakdown in slow motion. Kind of interesting. Pinkerton was released in September of '96, and for many listeners, it felt like the antithesis of the Blue Album. Pinkerton was abrasive, thematically dark, and painfully personal. Critics were quick to dismiss it at the time, and so were many of the fans, including me. I kind of grew on me. Behind the scenes, Cuomo demanded more and more control over every aspect of the band from that point. Sharp's role began to shrink by design. Rivers had the El Scorcho music video re-edited to minimize Sharp's presence. And then while Sharp was out of the country, Rivers and the remaining members secretly went back into the studio and re-recorded his bass parts on an upcoming single. This was without telling him, without even asking.
I gotta sing about it and make a record of my heart. For the night, this time I got back to the good life.
Now, Sharp ultimately left the band in 1998. The official reason was creative differences, but in reality, the relationship had been quietly dismantled from the inside. What Matt discovered after leaving made it even worse. Despite handling the band's early business affairs, contributing creatively to the Blue Album, and shaping the arrangements in Pinkerton, Sharp found himself locked out of the songwriting royalties entirely. Cuomo had registered 100% of the songwriting credits under his own name. Leaked emails would later surface suggesting Rivers was well aware that Sharp had a legitimate moral and legal claim to a share of the catalog. On April 19, 2002, Matt Sharp filed a 5-count federal lawsuit against Rivers, Cuomo, and Weezer, alleging he was owed a 25% stake in the first 9 tracks of Pinkerton and had been denied his rightful share of royalties from the Blue Album. He described the lawsuit as an absolute last resort. He didn't want to do it. A painful, reluctant move to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Now, the case did settle out of court, and the official songwriting credits were never changed. Sadly, it would be years before Cuomo and Sharp could even be together in the same room again. I don't know if I could ever be in the same room again if something like that happened. Jeez. All right, it's time for number 2, and I got a rough one here. I got the Yardbirds featuring Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. Before either of them were famous, Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck were two guitar-obsessed teens in London bonding over the music that they loved. Page's sister made the introduction, and the two quickly became inseparable, spending hours in Page's parents' living room, trading licks, dissecting records by Buddy Guy and Gene Vincent, and tinkering with amplifiers just to see how far they could push the sound. They were really close friends. They had a lot in common. They were kindred spirits. But eventually that brotherhood would crack under the weight of ambition, ego, and a one-way ticket out of Corpus Christi, Texas. We'll get to that in a minute, though. The story really begins with the Yardbirds. Formed in London in 1963, the band built their reputation for raw, high-energy blues, launching the career of one guitar legend before Beck even arrived. Of course, I'm talking about Eric Clapton. He was the first star. But when the band began drifting toward a more pop-oriented sound with 1965's For Your Love, he walked. Clapton wanted pure blues. The Yardbirds wanted hits. That wasn't going to work. So Beck stepped in as the replacement. It's actually Jimmy Page who recommended him. Can you imagine that many legendary guitarists from one band? I mean, what was in the water? Well, Jeff Beck got the gig because his best friend vouched for him. But what happened next would test their friendship totally. Beck's run with the Yardbirds was explosive and turbulent. He pushed the band into genuinely new territory, pioneering the use of feedback and distortion in ways that would help lay the groundwork for psychedelic rock and heavy metal. But Jeff Beck was volatile. His perfectionism, of course, legendary. His patience for grueling tour conditions was not. In April 1966, he was hospitalized in France with suspected meningitis, forcing an extended leave. With Beck sidelined, the band needed a guitarist. Enter Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page would originally join the band to play bass, but soon smoothly slid into the role of the lead guitarist. When Beck recovered and returned, the two shared lead guitar duties for a stretch. The music press loved the story of two guitar virtuosos going head-to-head every night. Very cool, Beck and Page. But Jimmy Page later admitted in a 1992 Guitar Player interview that the arrangement was often chaotic. Beck had brilliant moments, but he also had a habit of going rogue on stage. Said Page, and I quote, "Jeff had discipline occasionally. When he's on, he's probably the best there is. But at that time, he had no respect for audiences." The breaking point, that came in October of '66, during a punishing 30-day Caravan of Stars tour across the U.S. organized by Dick Clark. The band was packed onto a bus with mainstream teeny bopper acts grinding through night after night of shows. And by the time they reached Corpus Christi, Texas, Jeff Beck was unraveling. After a dressing room meltdown and a smashed guitar, the rest of the Yardbirds held a meeting and made it official. Jeff Beck, he was out. A public statement cited health reasons, but years later, Beck was more direct. He told interviewers he got kicked out so hard it was a brutal wake-up call. Page filled the lead guitar role without missing a step, of course. And from Jeff Beck's perspective, what came next stung even more than the firing. After the Yardbirds eventually dissolved, Page revamped the lineup, first calling the band the New Yardbirds, and then Led Zeppelin. The debut Jeff Beck group album, Truth, it had just been released to significant acclaim, built on a heavy blues rock foundation that Beck had pioneered. Page then recorded Zeppelin's debut using what Beck felt was the same sonic blueprint, including a near-identical version of Willie Dixon's You Shook Me, recorded just months after Beck's own version came out. Jeff Beck, he saw his childhood friend taking the musical identity he built and using it to launch one of the biggest bands in history. And you know what happened next? Now, fortunately, the friendship survived, but the sting of that chapter lingered for years. Man. All right, before we launch into the number one entry, I want to give a quick shout out to an amusing Iron Maiden story. Iron Maiden was formed on Christmas Day in '75 by bassist and primary songwriter Steve Harris in East London. During the band's formative years, they cycled through a revolving door of musicians, 18 in total by the time they released their first album. But by late 1978, the lineup stabilized around Harris, core guitarist Dave Murray, and charismatic gritty frontman Paul Di'Anno. This iteration recorded the Soundhouse tapes in 1979, a 3-track demo that created serious underground buzz in the UK. The band's momentum culminated in a major record deal with EMI in late 1979, positioning them at the forefront of the rising new wave of British heavy metal movement. In April of 1980, with the addition of guitarist Dennis Stratton and drummer Clive Burr, Iron Maiden released their self-titled debut. The record was an immediate commercial and critical triumph, debuting at number 4 on the UK albums chart, fueled by anthems like Running Free and Phantom of the Opera. These guys were going places. But the revolving door just kept on spinning, and Dennis Stratton wouldn't make it long enough in the band to see the release of their sophomore set, 1981's Killers. That's because behind the scenes, Maiden manager Rod Smallwood wanted him to weed out the riffraff. Get this though, reportedly, Smallwood noticed that Stratton was listening to bands like Whitesnake, Steely Dan, and the Eagles on the tour bus. And this was instead of bands in the vein of the aggressive new wave of British heavy metal sound. Smallwood wasn't down with Stratton's musical taste at all. He was concerned that that might soften the band's image. Can you imagine softening Iron Maiden? I don't think that's going to happen. So Rod and bassist Steve Harris secretly auditioned guitarist Adrian Smith behind Stratton's back. Can you guess what his musical tastes were? The moment the tour concluded, Stratton was called into a cold business meeting and was unceremoniously fired before he could unpack his bags. Horrible. All right, taking home the number one spot today is one that it's hard to even talk about. A band that deserved so much better. Talking about Badfinger. In the late 60s, Badfinger looked like the safest bet in rock and roll. The Welsh-English band had been discovered and signed directly to the Beatles' Apple Records. An endorsement doesn't get more prestigious than that. Badfinger, they delivered. A lot of people even thought it might be the Beatles in disguise. Armed with a natural gift for soaring melodies and driving power pop, they racked up a string of hits in the early 70s. No matter what, Day After Day, Baby Blue, so many more.
No matter what you do, day after day.
And their co-songwriters Pete Ham and Tom Evans even penned Without You, a ballad so perfectly constructed that it became a global number one hit for Harry Nilsson and decades later Mariah Carey.
Living is without you.
By any measure, Badfinger had everything it took to become one of the great bands of their generation. What they didn't have, though, was anyone protecting them from a guy named Stan Pauly, the biggest fraud in rock history. And you'll see why as I get into the story. As Apple Records began to crumble in the early 70s, the band needed a new direction. Their American business manager, Stan Pauly, stepped in with an answer. A massive multi-million-dollar deal with Warner Brothers Records in 1972. It looked like a lifeline. It would turn out to be anything but. Behind the scenes, Stan had constructed a holding company called Badfinger Enterprises, Inc., through which all of the band's earnings would flow. The musicians received small stipends. The rest just disappeared into what was basically a financial black hole. Nobody in the band fully understood what was happening. By the time they did, though, it was too late. The situation collapsed in 1974 when Warner Brothers discovered that a substantial chunk of advance money had been drained entirely. Warner Brothers was beyond furious. They filed a massive fraud lawsuit naming Pauly and the band itself as the defendants. Then they pulled Badfinger's new album, Wish You Were Here, off store shelves just weeks after its release. It was a disaster. A critically praised record that was gone overnight. The legal fallout, it was total, because their music was now entangled in active litigation. Badfinger couldn't release new material. Their income stopped completely. They couldn't pay rent. They couldn't escape their management contracts. And fraudster Stan Pauli, the man at the center of it all, he was nowhere to be found. As the primary songwriter, Pete Ham bore the brunt of the weight for sure. I mean, he'd poured everything into this band and watched it get systematically dismantled by someone that he trusted to look after him. On April 24th, 1975, at just 27 years of age, Ham took his own life in his garage. He left behind a note that in his closing line named the man responsible with heartbreaking directness. P.S. Stan Pauli is a soulless bastard. Wow, what a horrible person. To make matters even worse though, Tom Evans, Ham's songwriting partner and closest collaborator, he never fully recovered from that loss. 8 years later in 1983, he also took his own life. Sadly, Stan Pauli was never criminally charged and he died in 2009 having really no consequences at all. Badfinger's story is definitely one of the most devastating in rock history. I mean, they wrote songs that outlasted them by decades, performed by artists who sold tens of millions of records on the strength of what Ham and Evans had created. The music survived everything, but the men behind it didn't get the chance to do so. Sad.
I don't need it at all.
Well, there you have it. Some of the biggest double crosses ever. That is just that Badfinger, that story, it just cuts you to the bone. Truly, the biggest fraud in music history. What a horrible person. How can you do that? How could you do that to somebody? I just don't get it. The Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page thing, I understand that. I mean, there's competition there. Shouldn't have, anyway, first to the punch, that's how it is. Leave us a comment about this show. What do you think about it? Should we do more? What are your memories of these songs? What do you think about the double crosses? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We love to have you as part of our community. I've got it here, 3 chords and the truth. Until next time, my friends.